هي عملت منسقة الحملة الشعبية لمراجعة الديون بالبرازيل منذ سنة 2000. الحملة الأولى من نوعها في العالم، وأخيرا حتى حققت كده انتصار إنه بقى انتقلت من مجرد حملة شعبية الناس بتضغط من تحت علشان يتعاد مراجعة الديون البرازيل، إنه البرلمان يتبناها ويعمل زي يبدأ تحقيق رسمي في الديون دي بالفعل. الحاجة الثانية كمان هي خدمت في أول لجنة رسمية لمراجعة ديون الإكوادور، أنجح تجربة لمراجعة الديون وإسقاطها كانت في الإكوادور، كانت هي خبيرة في اللجنة دي. بدأت سنة عام 2007-2008 وشغلت منصب المقيم التقني للجنة البرلمانية لمراجعة الديون في الكونغرس البرازيلي. ماريا لوسيا تعمل حاليا على إعداد زي دليل جديد لمراجعة الديون، وهي كمان عايزة تتناقش معانا في مصر إنه إزاي نوصل الدليل ده، إزاي نخليه مناسب للحالة المصرية. أنا هسيب لكم كلام أكتر معاها لأن هي عندها كتير.
Good night. In the first place, I'd like to say that it's an honor for me to be here among you. And excuse me for the language, my home language is Portuguese. So I'll be speaking English and hope we'll have a good dialogue. I'll be talking about the IMF adjustment plan because you are under this pressure and the consequences in Brazil and some alternatives. Please. So first, the IMF adjustment plan. I would like to say, in the first place, what are the justifications for the intervention of IMF? What are the justifications presented? Here in Egypt, besides the urgency, because this is also part of the justification, the urgency, that I'm glad that I won't have to talk very much about this because it's been already done. The justification are the control of the public deficit, the consolidating of foreign currency reserves, and pay public debt. These are the reasons presented for the population, the society, that you have to go into IMF again. And it's very important to remind the method that IMF uses. First, everybody knows that all loans with IMF come along with conditions. And these conditions are adjust the economy policies in many ways, especially neoliberal reforms, eliminate restrictions on capital flows, shift tax burden directing into lower income, and mainly privatizations, including the privatizations of the banks. And we should ask, is all that true? First, about the control of the public debt. What generates the deficit in Egypt? What is the role of public debt on national budget? These were the questions we should answer before getting into IMF. And is IMF loan going to solve this? The consolidating of the foreign currency. What's the origin of the lack of foreign currency? And about paying the debt. What's the origin of the debt you're paying? What part of this debt is odious? This is a legal argument, odious debt. It's a legal argument created by United States. And what part of the debt is illegitimate, illegal? and should not be paid. Does anybody know what part of the debt is illegal, is odious, is illegitimate? You only know you are paying. And you are being told you must go to IMF to keep paying. Did this debt benefit the nation and the people of Egypt? Does anybody know where did this money did go through? Who got the benefit of this debt? You only know you are paying. An audit, a debt audit, would answer these questions. We have identified a debt system. What is a debt system? We have identified that the debt instrument is being misused. How? What is a debt for? I ask you. Why does a country or a person go and get a debt? What is the common sense about a debt? A debt is something we receive, right? When we get debt, we think we are receiving something, some resources, okay? We have identified with the audits that the instrument of the debt is being used instead of being an instrument of taking over resources. It's being, instead of being an instrument of financing, it's being used as an instrument of taking over resources. So that this year you took a lot of debt to pay previous debt. Last year you did the same. You contracted a lot of debt to pay previous debt. And so that an audit should search for the origin, so that you know what debt you are paying for. In the IMF adjustment plans in 1982, since 1982 in Latin America, and since 2008 in Europe, have the similar modus operandi, the similar manner. The adjustment plan comes with interventional in national domestic matters, comes with the order for privatizations, comes with deep social costs. Nick showed what's happening to Europe, but he didn't tell about the suicide of the young people. It's a tragedy in Europe now, the suicide of young people and elderly people, because they had believed in plans, in financial plans for their pensions, and the banks just let those plans break up. And there is no social repair for that. And all this with a lack of transparency, because the agreement is urgent. You have to do it. It's urgent. And there is no time to everybody take hold of what's going on. After IMF intervention, the public debt rised extremely in Latin America and in Europe. So we are not here to teach anything, just to tell you about what happened to us and what we don't want you to follow. Because the steps, as I'm going to show now, the consequences in Brazil were not positive. This is the national budget that happened in 2011 in Brazil. The yellow part, you see the 45% of the national budget in 2011 was destined to pay debt. At the same time, only 4% to health, only 3% to education. And all this sacrifice is not making the debt go down. In opposite, the external debt that started during dictatorship grew after the 80s, extremely after IMF agreements. And the most serious thing, the IMF agreement told us that Brazil had to do an agreement and transform private debts into public debts. So we discovered that recently on parliamentary investigation. Then the prepayment to IMF, that is this that happened here in 2005, many people think Brazil got rid of IMF. We paid IMF, but we still do the IMF program. That's why the domestic debt in Brazil is so serious. Our domestic debt is more than 2.5 trillion reais. That's $1.25 trillion. It's huge. And our interest rates are very high. So Brazil, one more please. That's because after 30 years of IMF in Brazil, we are one of the most tragic paradox in the world. Today, Brazil is the 6th major economy in the world, but we are the 3rd more injustice country in the world. Because we have some people very, very rich, and the majority of our population is poor and even miserable. We have hungry in Brazil, a country that exports so much food, even food to make fuel. We have hungry in Brazil. And last year, the United Nations classified Brazil as the 84th country in the respect of human rights. So it's very sad for me and for all Brazilians to face this picture. And we don't want this to happen to you, to Egypt. We must learn from Egypt how to make a revolution, because this picture calls for a revolution. So we must learn from you how to make a revolution. And we expect that you, after the revolution, do something different. Do something different. And we have this hope, because as you do something different, you are an inspiration for us to walk out through. That's true, that's true. To find this part, I'd like to tell you the strategy of keeping power under capitalism is working in our country. How it is working? Since we got into IMF policies, we've been increasing the profits of financial and big corporate sectors. This sector is very happy with what's happening in Brazil, because each year they got more and more advantages. This same powerful sector, financial and large corporations, finance the electoral campaigns so that they elected the majority of the deputies and senators, and they have people to vote their claims. And they are the same sector that pays for corruption, so that they have the ones to do the bad work for them. this same model guarantees extreme power to large press in Brazil that is very much in hands of the big banks and the corporations. And to make people very quiet, they guarantee an illusory distribution of wealth. How? With assistance plans, like for the real misery and very poor, a family basket. It's almost nothing, but for those poor people who received nothing, almost nothing is something. So they are very content. For the minor salaries, some adjustments in their salaries. Some access to cheap products, because that creates an illusory, an illusion that your life is better. And facilities to get debts and credits for the poor people. This is the way things are going in our country. So be aware of what's being offered to you. Finally, I have 5 more minutes to talk about the alternatives. And we have social and tax justice, capital control, and debt audit. I'll be very quick on social and tax justice because in the first panel you had many good information. So, some alternatives. Tax the wealthy. Review the subsidies given to the rich, not the subsidies given to the agriculture and necessities. Balance tax revenue by progressive taxation of income and property in progressive way, so that the richest one will pay more. Tax stock market transactions, because many times they pay no taxes. Capital control, protect from speculation, protect from capital flight, and protect from money laundering. A good example is Malaysia. I'm not going to develop these two first because they would be time for more 15 minutes each, but it's very important. And if you look at IMF recommendations, they are just the opposite. They plan for no capital control and they plan for a different shift in tax balance. I'll be talking more about that audit. So, what a debt audit was? A debt audit permits the access to documents and proofs in order to answer where does the debt comes from? How much the country actually received in loans? How much have been paid already? How many times do you think you have paid the real debt? How many times? How much do we really owe? Who contracted these debts? In 1931, a debt audit in Brazil found out that only 40% of the debt had contracts. Where were the results applied? Who got the benefits? What's the responsibility of the creditors and of the international companies? A debt audit, it's important to say. It's a technical instrument, but not only accounting. The first myth we must put off is that audit is something for specialists. It's not. You must have specialists in the commission because you will have to deal with accountancy and other things. but it's a work for every citizen. I ask, which journalist here, which person here cannot understand a contract? Everyone can understand. Everyone can identify what is illegitimate or not. Do you agree with me? So, the myth that this is a matter for specialists is to let people far from this. And this is important. This has to do with our own life. That audit explained the mechanisms that generate public debt. The crisis in Europe teaches us that not every time public debt means a money that the country received. Do you think that bailing out banks, and it's not any bailout, it's bailout banks that were speculating with derivatives. Do you think this is public debt that all citizens have to pay? Is this public debt? So, this is a mechanism that generates debt. Another mechanism that generates debt that we found in Latin America: transformation of private debt in public debt. Other mechanisms, simply financial mechanisms. That audit is an instrument that clarifies the reason for immensurable growth of the public debt. It's an instrument that shows the usurpation of the public debt in instrument. It unveils the legal and political instrumentation of the nation in benefit of private banks. It shows the speculation that benefits the banks. So, a debt audit is a process of knowledge of the reality of the financial reality of our countries. Please. There are some experiences in that audit. The most important one, in my opinion, is the Ecuadorian experience. Why? Because it's an official debt audit that counted with citizen participation. In Brazil, we have the citizen debt audit, that is a social movement that I have the proud to participate. And we had a parliamentarian investigation. This parliamentarian investigation is not still the audit, but it was an important step to show the necessity of the audit. And we have many other initiatives, for example, Ireland, that where an academic group did that audit. And we have many other initiatives in Europe right now. Ecuador gave us a lesson of sovereignty. The president created a commission for that audit. He signed a decree in 2007. And he nominated Ecuadorian people and foreign people, citizens, engaged to the theme of indebtedness. What did he do after the audit? When he had the inform of the debt audit, where we had proved illegalities, illegitimacies, he took a sovereign act. How? He offered to pay 30% of the remaining debt in bonds that is very similar to your domestic debt, very similar debt in bonds. He made an offer to pay 30% and put an end of it. To have an idea, this debt Ecuador used to pay 12% of interest per year, and still would have to pay 100% at the end of the period. He offered to pay 30%. Do you know what happened? 95% of the tenders agreed. The world didn't came down, and the other 5% never show up, never appeared. So this is important. This is an important experience, because what do they tell us when we try to face the market? The world will just come down into your head. So the Ecuadorian experience shows that it's not like that. The result for the government. This meant a save of $7.7 billion for Ecuador. What is very important for the size of Ecuadorian economy. And the result, an increase of social expenses, especially in health and education. So, the citizen campaign in Brazil, I believe your campaign here, Drop the Debt, is doing the same. We are looking for historical documents, doing studies, publications, analyzing the national budget, searching for legal arguments, looking for organizing demonstrations, organizing seminars, doing international connections with other organizations and with countries. And we have a website that unfortunately is in Portuguese. We have few things in English, but today I met a friend here that used to work in Brazil, and maybe he can translate some things from Portuguese to your language so that we can communicate more. See? Go ahead, please. So this is a picture of the kind of demonstration we did inside National Assembly in Brazil, our National Congress, on the day they were going to vote the final report of the parliamentary investigation. There was a risk that this would end up with not any inform. This demonstration with many people, with students and representatives of workers and everything, provoked that this parliamentary commission presented two reforms. And both of them have a good diagnosis of the problem, and one of them was much stronger, presented by the deputy Ivan Valente, the PSOL de São Paulo. And I worked as a technical assessor in this commission, and this deputy utilized all our reforms in his reform, and all this is all now in this moment in the Federal Prosecutor's Office to continue the investigations. So we're still fighting. Please. I'm finishing. This is only one of the things we discovered that I wanted to show to you. This is our external debt from dictatorship in the 70s till 1994. We used it to think IMF was our main creditor. What did we find out? The IMF is only this green thin line here. This mountain in red, you can see, are private banks, private international banks. They were the main creditors. So all that pressure that IMF was doing was in defense of these private banks. With this, I hope this also permitted to identify that the domestic debt is the new face of the external debt, because there was a transformation. So I hope that in your investigation you will also find this. I have to end. I thank you, and I really hope you are not going to wait 30 years like we did to start an audit.